Hello, good morning, and welcome back to Football League World TV, where we are once again discussing another managerial departure in the Championship. This time, the focus, of course, is on West Brom and the departure of Steve Bruce. I'll be your host, Toby Wilding, and joining me today to talk about the situation at the Hawthorns are two of my Football League World colleagues, Billy Mulley and Adam Jones. Thank you to both of you for being with me here. Billy, how are you doing?
Yeah, doing well, thank you. As you say, yet another managerial change in the cards. We were just speaking off air there about the sheer number of Championship managerial sackings already. And I think I seen the other day that Michael Beale at QPR is the 11th longest serving manager in the Championship, which is, of course, crazy given he was appointed at the start of summer. But yeah, it's another exciting time for us Championship fans to try and find the next successor ourselves.
Yeah, remarkable situation, as you say, Billy, in terms of that turnover. Adam, how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. It does feel like a very, very kind of crucial time for West Bromwich Albion, really. I mean, Billy was saying just before we went on air, and I completely agree with him that this is a crucial appointment for them coming up. So it'll be interesting to see who comes in.
Yeah, certainly will. And there's looks like there's plenty of contenders to keep an eye on for that job. Any West Brom fans who are watching, of course, please do get in touch and let us know who you'd like to see take over your club. But for now, let's get started. So before we do sort of turn our attention to those who could come in at the Hawthorns, let's first take a look at sort of the situation at West Brom at the minute and the departure of Steve Bruce. Obviously, Bruce leaving them 22nd in the Championship table with just the one win and 11 points from 13 league games so far this season. Obviously, that's some way below expectations at the Hawthorns. But Billy, when you sort of consider how things had gone in the second half of last season after Bruce took over, is that as much of a surprise as it perhaps could be?
I don't think it's a massive surprise that West Brom are not performing at the best of their capabilities. Of course, I think we have to take into consideration it was somewhat of a big summer for them. They added some real creative talents. They've, of course, used the free agent market quite late on into proceedings. So it's no surprise that it didn't click right away. I didn't expect, of course, 13 points from 13 games and sitting inside the relegation zone, but I wasn't also expecting fireworks. So it's a strange situation to be sitting in as well, because I think he's been given more time than the most Championship managers, given the fact that performances weren't as disastrous as, at Hull, of course. The performances turned really sour. Middlesbrough performances, there weren't much. No positivity really, but West Brom, they had dominated a few matches. They were significantly underperforming in their expected goals, which often is the case. Well, often after that, teams start to level that out and put form together, but that just didn't really happen at West Brom. And I think it's probably perfect time for the hierarchy to make the decision that they've made. Difficult for Bruce because, of course, as we've just mentioned, their performances weren't that bad, and you just need luck to go on your side sometimes to really get yourself out of those situations. But ultimately, looking at the points tally, looking at football being a results based industry, it's no real surprise that they've come to this decision.
Yeah, and Adam, as Billy said, there were certainly performances from West Brom at the start of the season under Bruce that did sort of give a fair amount of promise and encouragement. So ultimately, what do you think it was that went wrong for Bruce and West Brom?
I think it was a combination of factors, to be honest with you. I don't think you can kind of single one type of factor, really. I think, you could look to last season with Ishmael and say, well, they just weren't clinical enough, or they didn't have enough quality in the final third. I think for Bruce, it was a big mixture, really. I think, sometimes they weren't clinical enough. It was kind of similar to Ishmael, really, in the end. The likes of Preston, North End and Luton, the games against them, I thought they had some half decent chances that they should have taken and taken 3 points from. So that's obviously a massive shame for them. But obviously the defence as well, which was reasonably good at times last season. So over the course of the whole season, last term they had a decent kind of defensive record. So to come into this kind of campaign and look a little bit off kind of defensively is again, it's a massive shame for them. They're often done by kind of high balls over the top, and they often had quite a high line as well. And I don't know, maybe that was due to the fact that they're kind of still adapting to a back four. Obviously, they switched to a back four under Bruce, during the latter stages of last season. But they'd played a back five under Bruce and Ishmael at times. So maybe that was that kind of adaptation as well. So I do think it's a real mixture, really. Obviously, their away form as well has been really poor. Obviously, 4 points from 18 is not ideal, and obviously failing to turn draws into victories as well. And sometimes it is those fine margins, but there were so many factors I think working against them, including their attack and their defence, that I think in the end perhaps it's deserved the fact that they haven't got many points on the board. But I guess Bruce can feel slightly unlucky in a way.
Yeah, and Billy sort of mentioned there about you feel it was the right time. Do you just think that with results and also the sort of strength of feeling from the fans at West Brom that this was just something that had become unavoidable by now?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that for me, it was inevitable that it was going to happen at some point. Unfortunately, it just felt like it was a case of when, really, and not if, and that is a massive shame. But I honestly don't think they should have appointed him in the first place. I think he'd come off a very turbulent spell at Newcastle United. Needed, I think, at least a year or two after that to kind of recuperate, kind of. I guess like Chris Wilder did, took some time off and watched games. And I just think that Ron Gourlay made the wrong decision in appointing him, to be honest with you, in the first place. And obviously that atmosphere has become very toxic in the last couple of games, and that's not really surprising considering there's unhappiness with not just on-field figures like Bruce but also off-field, like obviously the owner and Gourlay as well. So it comes at a right time, I think, definitely. But you could definitely say that Bruce isn't the only problem, and for me, I do feel like it was the right time, unfortunately, even though they did put in some promising performances, as you said.
Yeah, I think that feels like a sentiment that is largely being echoed. That being said, Billy, when you sort of look at the squad that West Brom have in relation to the position they're in now, do you think those players at the Hawthorns need to take a bit of responsibility for this situation the club are in?
Yeah, I think partial responsibility, and I think Adam really hit the nail on the head when he said there's all these factors sort of accumulating, culminating to become one big factor to why Bruce was eventually sacked. And I think, yes, the players do have to take somewhat of a responsibility. Again, given the fact that they did dominate a few games, it does suggest that it was slightly a false position given how they were doing expected goals. But I think, as Adam went to mention as well, defensively, they were one of the meanest defences last year. And I know there has been certain personnel that's changed. I know Eric Peters and Kelly have come in at sort of a latter stage, and ultimately I think they've helped bolster that and improve the defence. I still think that a lot of attention needs to be paid to how they shipped in goals at will against Birmingham particularly, and Swansea as well. I think there's definitely, as we've mentioned already, lots of factors that have played a part. Players do have to take responsibility. I think, as Adam also went on to say, it was a wrong decision to appoint Bruce at the time. There's just so many factors in there, and it's hard to nail it down to just one or a couple. It's just all seemed to spiral downwards. And whilst Bruce is one of football's good guys and somebody that obviously and evidently has proven to be a good manager over the years, it just wasn't the right appointment at the right time. And I think that's probably the ultimate takeaway from this all.
Yeah, and Adam, you sort of touched on there about the situation with some of the decisions being made by the board and the unhappiness with them at West Brom as well. And I think we saw reports, didn't we, about the collapse of those two deadline day loan deals for Steven Alzate from Brighton and Josh Onomah from Fulham, sort of leading to a deterioration in the sort of behind the scenes relationship between Bruce and the board. For you, would that be a concern for West Brom in terms of how that sort of issue can potentially affect their search now for a new manager?
Yeah, I mean, the board didn't exactly cover themselves in glory. I thought it was a wrong decision at the time to loan out Alex Mowat I know that he didn't have the very best first season at the Hawthorns, but he's still a player that's got plenty of potential. When he's on top of his game, he can be a real asset going forward. So I thought it was the wrong decision to offload him in the first place, let alone to a league rival that could potentially be a promotion rival as well. I thought that was a disastrous decision. And then not to bring in replacements, I thought was absolutely terrible, really. They did some very good work earlier in the summer with John Swift and Okay Yakushlu coming in, and they did all the hard work really to kind of in terms of bolstering their midfield. Obviously, Malumbi coming in as well permanently, and then they undid that really with Mowat going and not being able to get some additions over the line. I guess Tom Rogic has come in and he'll come in to bolster the midfield, but they really haven't covered themselves in glory here. I think even in other areas, I don't think they've kind of bolstered themselves enough. I think perhaps Thomas Asante could have come in earlier in the window. I think in terms of the goalkeeping department as well, they could have strengthened. So, it definitely, I think it does kind of, affects how the West Brom board looks at the moment. Not just the owners, but the whole board itself. And it's still an attractive job, though. I think is the bottom line as well. They might not have the biggest budget, but it's still an attractive job with, and it's still a club with a lot of potential as well, with some good youngsters in there as well, including Gardner Hickman and Fellows, and obviously Cleary as well, who is yet to make a real impact at first team level, but is a decent player. So, I am a little bit concerned in terms of how they're portrayed at the moment, the West Brom board, because they haven't looked great in recent times, but it's still an attractive job. So I think for me, it shouldn't affect them too badly in the end.
Sure, and just sort of continuing with the direction that the board are moving in at the minute, we've sort of seen a few suggestions that perhaps it won't be an immediate appointment coming in now to replace Bruce. Billy, for you, is that sort of the right approach for West Brom to take, or should there be trying to get someone in as quick as possible given the way the schedule is falling?
Yeah, it's difficult to give a definitive response to that, because I think looking at the fixtures, looking at the sort of hectic schedule before the World Cup, it would suggest that something does need doing now if they want to not save their season, but if they want to be ambitious about what the rest of the season can hold. We're still 13 games in at the moment, but if appointment is not made now, you give it another month, and that's probably 19, 20 games of the campaign gone. So in that respect, you would sort of push towards an appointment happening quite soon. But at the same time, there's also in the background that there's this sort of feeling that Ron Gourlay wants to get his board sorted, get a director of football in place, sort of change things up from that kind of perspective. So if that's the case, I don't think you can go about rushing this managerial appointment, because you need somebody that will be able to work well with a director of football, perhaps have experience of working with a director of football. You don't want somebody coming in who's perhaps too opinionated for the role and wants to do everything by themselves. I think as mentioned before, it's a real critical time for West Brom. This next appointment needs to be right. No matter which way they go about it, it needs to be somebody that can advance this football club, because at the moment it looks like a sinking ship. And given the personnel at the club, you even look at the background staff, it's a good football club, and it's hard to put a finger on why things have gone wrong in the way that they have. But ultimately, there is a lot of potential, a lot of scope for this to go right.
Yeah, Billy, as you say there, it is absolutely vital for West Brom that they get this next appointment right. So let's now take a look at some of those who could be that next appointment for the Baggies. And once again, just to say, any West Brom fans now who would like to see any particular manager in, or who wouldn't like to see your club go for one particular manager, do let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to start by looking at Scott Parker, Football League World. We understand here that Parker is one of those being considered for the role. Adam, considering sort of the job that he's done in the past with the likes of Fulham and Bournemouth in getting them out of the Championship and into the Premier League, could you see him being a good appointment here?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be a bad appointment. I think he's quite heavily disrespected on social media, and I do see kind of parts of why. But obviously his track record it is there for everyone to see, really, in terms of getting Fulham and Bournemouth up. he's 41 at the moment. He's already got 2 promotions under his belt as a manager. So, he can't really be questioned really in a way. But I do think coming into the Hawthorns, I think this will be his biggest challenge yet. I think in terms of getting promotion, I think it'll be a massive kind of ask for him at the moment. I think obviously they're only 10 points adrift, I think, at the moment of the top 6. But no, I think it might take time for the new manager to kind of implement his ideas and that sort of thing as well. And obviously they're down at the bottom and the off-field stuff as well going on, and fans being unhappy. It won't be an easy task for him to guide the club up the table, very quickly. So I do think this is his biggest challenge yet. But it'll be interesting to see really if he is effective there. He could be a decent long-term appointment. Obviously, he didn't stay at Bournemouth for too long, which is obviously quite disappointing as well. But at the moment, the current state of play, obviously Billy was mentioning kind of behind the scenes changes. Kind of at the moment, kind of the current state of play, I do think that he'd have a decent say on recruitment, and perhaps that's important. Following his comments towards the end of his spell at Bournemouth about his squad not being good enough, etc., etc. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether which manager they go for depends on whether they change their structure, because if they are going to bring in a director of football that's going to have a big say on things, then I'm not sure if that's going to be a red flag to Parker or not, because I think it's still a fantastic opportunity to come to the Hawthorns. But I do think that he might be one of the better options out there.
Yeah, it's interesting, as Adam mentions there, despite the promotions and the CV that he has at the minute, Scott Parker, perhaps not universally popular, shall we say, with supporters of the clubs that he has managed, perhaps somewhat down to his style of playing. Billy, when you consider perhaps the pressure that is already being applied on those behind the scenes at West Brom by the fans, could that make this something of a risky appointment maybe?
Yeah, I think what we've heard as well, we've heard that the fan base's feelings towards Bruce has played a big part in the eventual parting company of Bruce at West Brom. So in that respect, I think West Brom fans do have a large say in what happens next. I think it's got to be somebody that will immediately get fans on board, and judging by social media and judging by comments about Parker, as much as I believe in what he can do, I don't think that would be the right way to go about it if it's something that will immediately not have fans on board. I think as well, what Adam mentioned about Parker hitting out at Bournemouth officials about not getting what he wanted during the summer. I don't know if that's the kind of person that West Brom need in their club, given that financial resources and not at the level that most actually expect with West Brom. Of course, they do quite good business, but they don't tend to spend too much money. And I don't know if that's the kind of job that will appeal to Parker, especially moving his career forward. So, yeah, with Parker and me, I think there's definitely positives to take from what he has done in the managerial scene so far. But ultimately, I don't think this is the job for him, and I don't think it's the job. It's the kind of appointment that West Brom should be considering at this point.
Yeah, and that turning our attention to another understood to be interested, and that is Chris Wilder, of course, just out of a job at Middlesbrough not that long ago himself. Given that sort of situation, Adam, could you see the West Brom role being one that appeals to him?
As Billy mentioned there, with a very limited budget, we've obviously seen it with the free agents and the loanees coming in. I can't see them, West Brom supplying the funds that Wilder would crave, to be honest with you. And obviously, I think he'll need quite, considerable funds. I think in the January window, if he was to take over, to kind of put his stamp on the first team squad. Obviously, they brought in Peters and Martin Kelly as well, and they've obviously kind of bolstered their back line and made a back three potentially viable. But I still think a considerable kind of amount of investment will be needed, and for that reason, I can't see them being a very good match. I think there was even a story that came out, I think it might have been after Allardyce was sacked, about Wilder potentially being appointed and the owner kind of vetoing it because of his previous relationship with Prince Abdullah, obviously the owner of Sheffield United. So I don't know whether it's going to be a good match or not. I think West Brom obviously kind of have to reconsider, because he's a good manager that's got a kind of a glittering CV really. Even despite the fact that he hasn't enjoyed the best spell at Middlesbrough. And yeah, I don't know if he has the players at the moment that will suit his kind of style at the moment. I mean, even looking at perhaps one of their better players of the season, Jed Wallace, this season. They could play him at wing back, and he's obviously got a very good cross on him. But is that the best way of utilising him? Ideally, you want him kind of further up the pitch. So I'm not sure it's a good match at the moment, even though that Wilder's got obviously, as I say, a fantastic CV.
Yeah, Billy, for you, is this a good match? Is it one that would suit the desires of the West Brom fans, given Wilder's CV, or do you think they do perhaps need to be going for someone who, as Adam says, might sort of fit the current style that they have a bit more?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Adam's saying there. Wilder, obviously a very good Championship manager, somebody that sees pretty much instant success with the spells that he's had at various clubs. Of course, he's somebody that will be associated naturally with the job, but again, I don't think the style matches. I don't think vision aligns with the board. I don't think it's one that for me will go any further than the current stage it's at. As Adam said, playing style is massive, and I think that's going to be absolutely integral to how West Brom go about this appointment. I think 4 at the back is the way to go, given the sheer number of attacking talents they've got. You don't really want to take Grady Diangana, John Swift, Jed Wallace out of their sort of more comfortable attacking roles. But at the same time, Chris Wilder is a very good manager who would be able to get the best out of players. It's a difficult one, because I do feel Chris Wilder would be able to improve the current situation, but how long for is my question. We've seen sort of his spells deteriorate as they've progressed. And I think ultimately for me, as mentioned before, that the fact that these relationships are strained at different clubs, the fact that, he didn't get on too well when he had a director of football in place at Middlesbrough. And that's the kind of way that West Brom is seemingly trying to go. For me, that's not the way that West Brom should be taking this managerial search. And whilst Chris Wilder, for me, will get a very, very good job, I don't think this is the fit at all.
Yeah, and another name who has sort of emerged recently as a potential contender is the former Huddersfield boss, Carlos Corberán. Obviously, just been sacked after a rather brief spell in Greece with Olympiacos. Billy, I'll stay with you for this one. When you sort of consider the work he did with the Terriers last season, and now in comparison to the situation West Brom find themselves in, could that be a good fit?
Yeah, this is one that I'm fully behind. He massively overachieved with the squad I think he had at Huddersfield. I think the main thing here, I think the main thing he would be able to bring to West Brom is the fact that he could pick wins up in different ways. They could dominate football matches and get the victory. They could, really struggle and not put in the best of displays, but find goals out of somewhere. And that's the kind of thing that I think West Brom need. They need that ability to win football matches again, whichever way that is. Carlos Corberán's still young, he's progressive, and I guess he meets the two kind of criteria that West Brom will be searching for here. Somebody young and progressive who can carry on the sort of football club and head in a new direction, but also with the experience of doing well in this division, which I think is going to be critical for what they do next. Corberán for me is a very, very impressive manager. Impressive what he's done so far. Massive potential for him to go far in his managerial career. And whilst untested consistently, given that it's only been two seasons of management in the Championship, I still think he's got the sort of desirable traits to take a club like West Brom forward. And, given the array of attacking talents they've got, I think this would be something that would appeal to him, something that he could definitely build upon. And I know that there became slight tensions at Huddersfield given sort of the financial situation. I think it's a definite step up in terms of finances going to West Brom. He would be able to push things more that he'd want to do to try and get promotion at West Brom, which would ultimately be the objective. But at the same time, I don't think he'd test the limits very much. I don't think he'd go overboard like, say, a Wilder would do. So for me, Corberán, standout candidate for me.
And of course, even beyond those three we have just discussed, there are plenty of other names I'm sure will be in the mix. Likes of Michael Carrick has been mentioned, although it's starting to look as though reports are increasingly linking him with taking over Wilder's job at Middlesbrough. Roy Keane, another who has been mentioned, although his comments last night appeared to play down a potential move. Nice of him to do that after I'd made my notes for today. But Adam, so when you're looking out there, are there any other potential standout candidates you could see for this role at West Brom?
I wouldn't say he's exactly a standout candidate. I think Gary Rowett would be a steady but unspectacular appointment. I think he could guide them perhaps to a mid-table finish. I think at the moment escaping the relegation zone has to be the short-term aim, because I think relegation would be an absolute disaster for them. And I don't think there can be room for any complacency either, because you've got the likes of Huddersfield obviously below them. They obviously won at the weekend, and Mark Rotherham seems to be getting his boys going. Coventry City as well, when they have Hamer and O'Hare and Gyökeres on the same pitch, I think that'll be a force as well. So there can be no room for complacency. They've got to earn their place in the division, and I think that Rowett would kind of help to kind of tighten up their defence. And obviously he knows Jeb Wallace as well, so he could kind of get the lowdown kind of on the players before he actually makes his own judgment, and perhaps that will kind of help him to make a short-term impact. And I think that'll be important for them, because at the moment they're looking like they're in a very kind of precarious position. So for the short term, I think Rowett would be a decent manager, but I don't know about the long term in terms of getting them promoted back to the Premier League. It's one of those where it's a 50-50. I think if they did appoint him, I don't think it'd be the worst appointment, but perhaps they could go for another option. But I think that he's someone that could definitely kind of get them outside of the relegation zone. I think it'd be less of a risk than kind of the likes of Carrick and Rob Edwards. So yeah, I think that's the only other one I think that's kind of worth mentioning here is Gary Rowett.
Let's now just look ahead a bit to the rest of the season for West Brom, and we've sort of maybe touched on these long and short term ambitions for the Baggies. But Billy, when you sort of consider the squad on offer to a new manager and the funds, the backing they might get from the board, with the position they're in now and how long's left of the season, what sort of do you think should be an aim for West Brom for the rest of the season?
It's difficult because I think it all depends on how quickly this managerial situation's solved. I think that if it's done imminently, which I know the reports doesn't indicate that it will be done, I think there's still massive scope for them to do very well this season. We've seen it with Forest, we've seen it at Sheffield United. That was just last season that they can quickly eliminate that sort of negativity around a poor start to the season. And really start firing. I think the fact that the division is still very, very close and competitive at the moment, only 10 points separate the relegation zone from the top six. I think that bodes well for a manager coming in. I also think the fact that the performances have been there, they've put in dominant displays, the XG's there. I definitely think there is scope for West Brom to do very well this season, but we're coming to that hectic schedule where Saturday, Tuesday games are very, very common just ahead of the World Cup. If they take, a month or sort of even 3 weeks to appoint this, the ambition of succeeding this year might diminish. But ultimately, looking at the situation now, there's definitely lots of scope for West Brom to do very well this season, should they get this managerial appointment right, because as I think both me and Adam have mentioned there, it's a massively, massively important time for them, and a massively sort of important time for them in terms of realising what their ambitions might be.
Yeah, as Billy says there, Adam, hugely important time for West Brom at the minute. So with that in mind, with the squad that is available to them, and sort of even looking ahead with the managers who may be coming into the Hawthorns, can you see them producing a quick turnaround now following the departure of Steve Bruce?
It's very difficult to say. I think with Steve Bruce gone, I think they perhaps got rid of 20%, perhaps of the problem, maybe 30%. I think there are still some deep issues that need to be solved at the Hawthorns behind the scenes. I think the relationship between the board and the fans needs to improve a lot. I still think that Ron Gourlay's got a lot to prove. Obviously, he said back in February when Bruce was appointed that he was on a short list of one, and that's kind of damning, really, looking back at it. Kind of a damning indictment, really, of kind of the managerial recruitment process. So obviously the fans will be keeping tabs on him, and I think they should as well. Obviously had as I know, a very disastrous spell at Reading. So I am hoping that Albion can kind of turn things around quite quickly. But I think they may get perhaps something short term, perhaps a short term boost, and perhaps that's all that's needed, really, to get them away from the relegation zone at the moment. But in terms of the long term, there's definitely work to be done off the pitch and definitely on the pitch as well. I think perhaps a rebuild, perhaps next summer, wouldn't be too much of a bad thing either. But in terms of the short term, there's definitely they've definitely got the quality of players there to kind of have an upturn in form, but they've got to step up to the plate now, because as Billy mentioned earlier, they've got to take some responsibility for the predicament that they currently find themselves in.
Yeah, big job coming up for West Brom, both on and off the field, which, as we've been reiterating throughout the show, makes this next appointment so important. And so we'll come to that final big question now. And Billy, I'll come to you first on this. If you were a West Brom fan, who would you like to see take over from Steve Bruce?
I'd love to see Carlos Corberán there, not being obviously I'm a fan of another championship club, so I wouldn't want to see too much success, but I think he would be the kind of manager that can sort this situation out. And maybe it wouldn't be this season, but I imagine them thriving under Corberán's stewardship. And you think the attacking quality he managed to get out of the sort of striking options he had at Huddersfield last year. Imagine what he can do at West Brom with Jed Wallace, John Swift, Grady Dieng-Garner, Brandon Thomas Asante coming into form. I think there's definitely a good chance of Corberán doing some really good things at West Brom if that's the way they go. And defensively, we know what he can do as a manager. He turned a Huddersfield defence that they had Matty Pearce and Tom Lees all sort of heading towards the bottom end of the Championship. Even League One turned them into a real mean defence last year. So if it is Corberán, I'll be really excited to see what West Brom can do.
Yeah, and Adam, for you, who should Ron Gourlay be looking to bring in at the Hawthorns now?
Yeah, I think the Corberán is an excellent shout. I've got two more names kind of in mind. I think that the first is Scott Parker. Maybe I think he kind of already knows the division. There could be, as I said, a good potential kind of long-term appointment. Has got a very decent CV. And I think the assignment really of getting Albion out of the relegation zone shouldn't be too difficult for him, considering what he's achieved in the game. But obviously, I think, as Billy mentioned earlier, I think the kind of the structure that West Brom have going forwards may be kind of, it kind of may depend on how good of an appointment this is. Obviously, he isn't going to have a huge amount of funds, but in terms of the Championship, it shouldn't be a problem. So in terms of the short term anyway, he shouldn't have too many conflicts with the board. But if they do get to the Premier League, then they may have something similar that what happened to Bournemouth. So that's obviously one thing to consider. The other manager that I'd love, and I think this is just basically based off kind of bookmakers and that type of thing, I think is Sean Dyche. I think he's very effective. I think he's got unfinished business really after his time at Burnley. I think he was harshly dismissed really. I think Burnley may have even had a shout of staying up really if he'd stayed. And perhaps this is a kind of a very little detail, but I've seen him kind of go on podcasts recently. And he does seem like a really good character, and I think that kind of that mix of being effective and also being a really good character as well will bode well for Albion. And I think that he'd be a really good manager to have. And one final thing, he's also worked within very limited budget, so I think he's got the ingredients there to be a real success in the Midlands.
So as we have proven there in just a little more than half an hour or so, there is plenty here for West Brom to consider as they assess their options in replacing Steve Bruce. For us, that's just about all we've got time for. So my thanks to Adam and Billy for joining me today and giving me their thoughts, some really good insight there. That is all for Football League World TV, but please do keep an eye out. There'll be plenty more to come, no doubt. Many more Championship managerial changes to discuss sooner rather than later. If you have enjoyed watching this on YouTube as well, please do subscribe to our channel. It really helps to build the profile. But for now, it's thank you and goodbye.